Hi, Elkie. This is your Monday afternoon art lesson, and it is actually a repeat of an art lesson that you had in April of 2018, almost 4 years ago, in which I asked you to do a symmetrical geometric design. I asked you to draw a square and to put an X in it and to make a 4-part symmetrical design. And I went through a procedure of showing you how you do one shape at a time 4 times using the guide of the X. And so that's what you drew. But now, several years later, you have a lot of skills that you didn't have when you did this. And I'd like to do a more elaborate one with specific requests of types of shapes. So here I've started with a 10-inch square. I separated it with diagonals from the corners, which gives me the exact center. Then I measured off 5 inches to get the centers of the sides. And I connected those centers to give me another X that divides my square into 4 equal sections. Now, I will use these lines as a guide, but not exactly, because when you're doing a design, you forget the guide, and you just start putting things where you feel like they ought to go, and they end up like, for example, if I were to start with a square here, and I want to do 3 more, I'll put one here, and one here to start my design. Now the problem with what I did is, you can see at a glance that that square is closer to the center than that. That is pretty much in the center of that distance. That's a little to the left, that's a little out, and that's a little too close. And so my guides are just very approximate, because when if I were to go to connect these, automatically I don't have really exactly a symmetrical design. Now, let's look at this. This is a machine-made design. So if I were to put my ruler on the center and measure out to this point, and this corresponding point on the other side, or this point and that point, you can be pretty sure, since this is a machine-made design, that it would be almost perfect, or so close that I can't see the difference. But you can see at a glance that you might say that I've already screwed this up by putting that too close to there, but that is not true. The truth of the matter is this, that these unevennesses make it more appealing and more beautiful. The incorrect portions of a design are often where the beauty lies. And that's why most people would not agree that this is not as good as this as a design. Because this has a liveliness, and this is without any kind of life, but at least it's interesting. But we use these elements and unevenness to make the most possibly interesting design. But let's get on to the details of this assignment. It's going to have squares. Now I'm going to, because of my mistake, I'm going to revert to the center to be more careful, and I'm going to say I have put in squares. Now next I want to use circles, excuse me. I'm going to start with a circle in the center, and I'm going to add 4 more circles. Now, the next shape, I'm going to write that down. I have circles. I want to put triangles. Here goes a triangle. In my design, I want to use, I'm going to stop for a second and point out that that one is bigger than that one. And these are pretty much exact, but this is almost an equilateral triangle, and this is nowhere near an equilateral triangle. So I'm going to remind you again that It's the unevennesses which approach symmetricalness that give it liveliness. Now I'm going to put in, we have triangles, circle, square, circle, triangle, I want oval. And the oval very naturally could fall here. Yes, I left that space on purpose because that square is too far out. Now, I want you to incorporate ideas from last week's assignment. Last week's assignment involved overlap, where a shape like E goes in front of L. Remember that? I want shapes in this design where a shape looks like it's in front of another shape. So what shape will I use? I'm going to use another square. I'm going to put my square here, between my triangle and my oval. Now actually, I did not draw a square. I drew a letter N upside down 8 times and implied that there's a square because I used overlap. So we're going to use overlap. Next idea we're going to use is doubling. Doubling was used in this design of yours here. The circle was doubled. The square was doubled. And so in my design, I'm going to double the oval to start with. You see, I cut it off a little bit because I want the oval to be over the square, but I want the square to be over the doubled oval, just because that's the way it occurred to me to do. Now I'm going to double the bottom part of the triangle. Next, the next thing is an accent point. A-C-C-E-N, accent point. An accent point is a spot that calls attention to a portion of the drawing, or actually is a small shape that's colored in. So for example, in this, these are accent spots, that, where the shape, it's using lines, but where the shape gets fatter. I'm going to steal one of these shapes. I'm going to take that shape right there, which is like a flower pattern, and I'm going to put it right here. But mine is more like a diamond. And I'm going to color it in, and I'm going to give my drawing an accent point, like a little house. Now, I like that, so I'm going to do another accent point. I'm going to put an accent point here, but that space is not repeated. I have a space here, but I don't have it here, so I'm going to just put it inside the square and inside the square. So accent point, let's do one more accent point. Let's do a dot with a circle, dot with a circle, dot with a circle. Now, anyone can see that that drastically improves my design by giving it something the eye can focus on, and it makes it somehow more painterly, or could say more decorative. I don't know what term to use. Now the next idea is a floater. I'm going to put it here, a floater. A floater is a shape unconnected to the other shapes. So I'm going to put a floater right here. It's going to be a heart. Now this time I'm going to be a little more careful and try and get it really more symmetrical. I'm going to double the floater. I'm going to accent the floater. I'm going to overlap the floater. And I'm going to add another floater in between the floater and the center. Now, what does this maybe remind you of? Well, I don't know if it reminds you of it, but I'll tell you. A couple weeks ago, you were showing me images and you were asking me to guess, or I was trying to guess what it was. And what it was your father's drawing on the wall over the couch. And you had put it into a kaleidoscope program of a section of it, which turned it into a thing which has this characteristic. In other words, it took a part of it and it duplicated it mechanically around in a circle, so you had thousands of lines where there had been one. That kaleidoscope effect, this is that kaleidoscope effect. It takes one element and repeats it over and over again. Now, one other concept that's going to be used in this drawing, excuse me while I double this one. It looks like it needs it. The next concept we're going to use is called framing. Put it over here, framing. In framing, you make a shape that incorporates everything drawn at this point. Here is a framing shape. Now, having drawn my framing shape, I'm going to double it. Now, how far off have I gotten? Pretty far off. That is very close to my diagonal line. And that is very close to my diagonal line. But this is... That is my phone, but I'm not going to answer it. Pennsylvania, so expand. Also, you'll notice I started with a square, and I ended up, this is not a square. This is a rectangle. It's fatter than it is high. That's because gradually I got more and more off. Partly, probably because I'm standing to the left of my drawing, out of the view of the camera, that is causing me to give it a kind of asymmetry to my symmetrical design. But anyway, that is a framing device. So, having done framing, I'll add one more thing, and that is border design shape. Now, the border design shape, you take a single shape and you repeat it as a border to existing shapes. So, for example, very often borders are dots or half circles in a circle. I'm going to use both of these. I'm going to use dots and half circles, but I don't want to do, I just want to put it in as an idea, because I don't want to do the whole thing because it'll take too long and it use up my battery. So, with dots, I'll just do a little bit and ask you to imagine that I did the whole thing, because I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do half circles. And this time I'm going to go all the way across. Half circles. Now, half circles inside of a half circle. picture that. Picture the dots all around. Picture the half circles all around. And you can see what I'm driving at. So your assignment is to do a symmetrical 4-part design with, it can be one color or it can be with markers. It's got to have squares, circles, triangles, and ovals, overlap, accent points, floaters, framing, and border design, and one other thing. I want you to not do it by yourself. I want you to ask Castle to do half of it. Every time you put a shape in, she puts a shape in. And it might be interesting to assign colors. For example, you could assign her red and you take purple, or she could have orange and you take green, or whatever. And it could be a third person. You mentioned another person that visits, another friend that visits. I don't know her name because I haven't met her. So it could be 3 people making a 4-part design. Or your mother could put a 4th mark, and it could be 4 people making a 4-part design. Or if I'm visiting and I could do one of the shapes every 5 times, the more the better. The more people that are included. You know, this needs a little square in the corner, don't you think? Oh, it needs a square in the corner. But also needs an accent dot in the corner. What else? It needs a floater right here. Well, now it's very sloppy. Needs a floater right here. Now, how many elements can these designs have? They can have infinite elements, but I want to stick to these. But it's my own habit to always have to complicate things. And so I want to point out that if I were to draw a line here, and here, and here, and here, I introduce another element that I want you to notice. It's a it's the blank white space that's like here and here, here and here, here and here. The blank white space is a part of the design. Look at the blank white space in these. The blank white space makes shapes that are interesting. And so it's often good to intentionally make a big blank border because it accentuates the small parts. And having made it, you can add to it. So I'll put a floater in here. But anyway, I have to conclude. We can't just go on and on, although we could keep going on and on, adding things all day. And if I spent all day on it, it would be very, very wonderful thing to look at. So could make it into a rug or wall hanging. Anyway, talk to you Friday.